How does a government's seemingly perfect solution to a huge problem end up accidentally sparking a revolution? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. This is the story of how a newly independent Mexico, desperate to secure its borders, invited a wave of American settlers into its frontier, a decision that set two completely different cultures on an unavoidable collision course.
And this quote from an early settler, it just perfectly captures the vibe. Back in the 1820s, Texas was the ultimate frontier, a land of incredible opportunity, sure, but also a place of extreme hardship. It was that promise of cheap land and a fresh start that pulled people in, even when they knew how dangerous it was going to be.
So to really get this, you gotta understand the problem Mexico was facing. After winning its independence from Spain, Mexico was left with this massive northern territory that was, well, pretty much empty. You had these three tiny settlements, isolated and totally vulnerable to raids from powerful Plains Indian tribes. Mexico just couldn't convince its own citizens to move there, so this huge piece of land was more of a liability than an asset.
So what do? Well, Mexico's solution was honestly pretty clever. They decided to continue a plan the Spanish had started and just invite foreigners to do the settling for them. To do that, they created this really unique system based on land grants. And at the heart of this whole plan was a figure called the empresario. You can think of them as colonization entrepreneurs, really. The Mexican government basically outsourced the incredibly difficult and expensive job of taming the frontier to these guys.
And let me tell you, the deal they offered was sweet. It was a huge incentive. An impresario would get a contract, then go recruit families who were supposed to be moral and hardworking, and from managing the colony and making sure they followed Mexican law, he would get a massive land bonus. We're talking tens of thousands of acres. It was definitely a high-risk, high-reward kind of deal.
And speaking of high reward, nobody played the game better than this guy, Stephen F. Austin. He would become the most successful, most famous impresario of them all, taking over the very first grant ever issued.
And here's a crazy bit of history. The whole thing almost never happened. See, it was Austin's father, Moses, who got the original contract, but then he died right after securing it. His dying wish was for his son Stephen to see the Texas venture through. And even though Stephen was reluctant at first, he honored that wish, and in doing so, he kicked off the entire colonization movement.
So why would anyone pack up and move to this dangerous place? Well, it all boiled down to one simple, powerful thing: land. And we're talking a lot of land. A single family could get more than 4,600 acres, way more than they could ever dream of in the United States. And it was practically free. That was the engine driving this whole migration.
That first group became legendary, the Old 300. They paid Austin just 12.5 cents an acre for his help. News of this unbelievable deal spread like wildfire back in the U.S. Soon, you had a steady stream of people heading for Mexican Texas, many of them leaving debts behind, sometimes just scribbling GTT, gone to Texas, on their cabin doors and taking off.
Okay, so Mexico's plan is working, right? People are flooding in. But, and this is a huge but, there was an unintended consequence. The plan to populate the frontier was a runaway success, but the plan to integrate those people? Yeah, that was a whole other story. The solution was quickly turning into a brand new problem.
And this slide right here just lays out the massive disconnect. Mexico had these clear expectations. They wanted these settlers to become fully Mexican, loyal to the government, Catholic, Spanish-speaking. But the reality on the ground, it was completely different. The Anglo-Americans weren't just moving to a new house, they were bringing their entire world with them. A world built on Protestantism, speaking English, and his fierce desire for self-government. And, critically, an economy that depended on slavery.
And that issue of slavery became one of the biggest, most explosive points of conflict. Mexican law was moving to abolish slavery completely. To get around this, the Anglo-settlers came up with this legal workaround, these 99-year indenture contracts. It was basically a legal fiction that allowed slavery to keep growing in Texas, even though it went against everything the Mexican government stood for.
And you can just see how things got worse and worse over time. That Fredonian rebellion in 26 was small, but it was like a warning shot that terrified the Mexican government. So they responded with the Law of April 6th, trying to slam the door on any more immigration from the U.S. Of course, that just made the colonists furious, and it led to direct clashes like the ones in Anahuac.
So by the time we hit the early 1830s, we're really at the point of no return. The colonization project had succeeded in filling the land with people, all right? But it had completely failed to make any of them truly Mexican.
Let's just take stock of where things are in 1835. You've got a situation where Anglo settlers vastly outnumber Mexican residents. They've set up their own local governments, called ayuntamientos. They were actively resisting any attempts to Mexicanize them. At this point, their main political goal wasn't to assimilate, it was to get more autonomy. That set the stage for the final break.
And that really is the heart of it, isn't it? Mexico's solution to its Texas problem actually worked too well. The strategy brought in the people, but it also imported the leading edge of American westward expansion, a culture that wasn't just going to resist assimilation, but was driven to remake the land in its own image.
Which leaves us with this big question to think about. When you have a nation trying to build a country, and it invites in a people who are driven by their own sense of manifest destiny, is a clash inevitable? Was this experiment, built on a shared hunger for land, just destined to fail from the get-go?